or a senior staff person, sometimes a junior staff person or a volunteer or a current board member. But the contact that leads to success is more often than not provided by some sort of personal connection between the nominee for the board and somebody who's already associated with the organization. And so one of the things that I've suggested for a long time in nonprofits that I've worked with is that it's useful periodically for a board, even if it's just a discussion at a board meeting, to do an inventory of what personal contacts exist with senior staff and the board of directors for approaching folks who might be interested in serving on the board. Even if you only allocate, 5 minutes to that task every other board meeting, it's a way of being current and of sometimes discovering within that conversation connections that can to get to the right people to be on the board. And of course, that's an important element of board recruitment. You don't want just anybody to come on the board. You want to have a board of directors that's committed to your mission, that's committed to helping the organization develop resources and other things that we'll talk about in a moment. So that's point number one. Tip number two, use your experience in the past. That's part of why I wanted Cindy and Pierre to be part of this conversation, is that for all of us, answering two questions can help you with your strategy for recruiting board of directors members. In the context of using personal contacts, in a way, we could just stop the conversation here, and this would be enough to get you started. But we are going to go further with some additional tips. And the two questions are: how did you last successfully recruit a board member? When it worked, what did you do? Was it a personal contact? Was it some sort of connection with an organization that provided, like the African American Board Leadership Institute in that particular population? But how did it happen? What was it that was the engine for success? And secondly, what happened the last time you had a negative experience recruiting a board member? And that's a little trickier to deal with, especially in the context of a board meeting, and people want to make nice and not talk about unpleasant things. And yet the learning value, as we know from failure, is at least as great as learning from success, and identifying clearly what went wrong and how to prevent that from happening in the future can also be an important way to develop a good strategy for recruiting board members. Now, to overview what's needed, this is tip number three, for some kind of systematic process for board recruitment. In a way, I've sort of presaged the first part of this tip. You need to have a strategic process for recruiting board members. Unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits, even big, well-established ones, have a furor of activity for new board members, and then nothing happens for months or even for several years until it's clear we need to recruit more. And that's the far less effective way to go about it. This needs to be a year-round activity, needs some kind of leadership. In many cases, a governance committee or a nominations committee, whatever you call it, but several board members who are willing to take on the task of coordinating board recruitment efforts. There needs to be a systematic way to communicate expectations to a candidate, what you expect a board member to do, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Follow-up is a key to success. Can't tell you the number of times I've seen nonprofits that make a wonderful first approach to a potential board member and then expect that that person will contact them, and if it doesn't happen, life goes on, nobody does anything about it, and the contact is lost. So if part of your structure for recruiting board members is a regular follow-up procedure, that you have a nominations committee or some similar body, 2 or 3 board members that take responsibility for that. They need a hit list of the people that you're considering for board membership and some sort of time schedule for, if you don't hear from them in 2 weeks or a month or whatever the right timing is, that you'll follow up. One option that when I was running a nonprofit, I found particularly useful was to set up the expectation whenever somebody came onto my board of directors for the Human Interaction Research Institute. Part of the deal was that they could not leave until they had nominated a successor, so that there was part of the board recruitment process was a specific task of each person on the board. And when they got ready to leave, they could use their connections to find a replacement. And some of our best board members over the 30 years that I ran that organization came from exactly that process. And if you set it up in advance, then at least there's a good chance that the departing board member will make a serious effort. Diversity of board candidates obviously is an important issue, particularly these days where you will be asked by a funder. Foundations in particular tend to do this. What's the profile? What minorities are represented on your board? Do you have members of the community? Do you have clients or client representatives on your board? Don't have to answer all those questions, yes, but you do need to be prepared to answer them, and looking at ways that you can increase the diversity in your roster of board candidates is an important part of the recruitment strategy. That leads to the fourth point about recruitment resources. For diversity purposes, again, personal contacts are the most useful, but there are also groups in the community. Two of them that are particularly active in this realm are, I already mentioned, the African American Board Leadership Institute and the California Latino Leadership Institute are two organizations that specialize in connecting potential board members with nonprofits. And so those are two entities that you can consider, but there are other organizations that live in the diversity space, or perhaps an organization you're friendly with that has a very diverse board of directors. You can get some advice from them to figure out how to reflect diversity while also making the main requirements shine of people who are committed to the organization, people who are able to contribute or get others to contribute financial resources. So you can do both. Fifth, and finally, coming back to that earlier point about communicating expectations, boards of directors need position descriptions for officers, but also for a member of the board, so that you've got something. It doesn't have to be a big, lengthy document. It can be couple of paragraphs, certainly no more than a page, that says, if I'm a member of your board, what do I do? What are my responsibilities? What are my duties? What kinds of things should I be thinking about in making the decision to come on the board? So having a position description for board members as well as officers is one part of being able to communicate what your expectations are. Some sort of simple letter of agreement that a potential board member signs at the point where they actually agree to come on the board is an important element of an overall recruitment strategy that you want to have laid out very simply. Maybe it's a summary of what's on your position description, but you want to have something that by providing their signature to it, the new board member indicates that they've read it, they've understood it, and that they're prepared to take on those responsibilities, as well as talking about what's the board term, can the term on the board be renewed, what are the meeting practices, how often do meetings occur, what are the board dues, or that famous expression, give or get, do you serve on committees? Is that required? Is it optional? Do you have other fundraising responsibilities that may bring you into contact with staff who have those responsibilities? And what is your role with respect to the overall governance of the organization? Remembering what we already all know on this convening, at least, is that as a board member, you are the legal representative for the state of California and the IRS, that you have taken on the responsibility of overseeing the organization fulfilling its tax exempt qualifications. The reasons that it got certified as a nonprofit is to provide some sort of service in the community. You have that responsibility to mission, and you also have a fiduciary responsibility to look at the finances of the organization to see that there's reasonable good success in keeping the finances in order, and getting that communicated to new board members sometimes takes a little bit of doing. A lot of nonprofits find that it's helpful to have something, whether it's literally a notebook or just a folder with some pieces of paper in it, a board orientation package that includes bylaws, the articles of incorporation, a copy of the directors and officers liability insurance, PS on that subject. I have been a thorn in the side of many nonprofits who, when I started working with them in a couple of cases when I was invited to be on a board, and they did not have directors and officers liability insurance, and advocating for that to get it as quickly as possible if a nonprofit doesn't already have it is important. And most candidates for board positions want to see a copy of the actual insurance policy, a strategic plan, something else that can go into the orientation package, policies and procedures of the organization, a roster of the board, who else is on the board, you know, where do they live, what are their work roles, just enough information to start the acquaintance process. And some sort of board orientation process for new board members is also important, where they get a copy of whatever the board orientation package looks like, and some kind of dialogue. It may be with a nominations committee, it may be with the chair or president of a board. One technique that some nonprofits use that I think can be particularly helpful is to appoint someone who's a current board member to be what's called technically a board buddy. That is, in the first month or so of service, for somebody who is an experienced board member in the organization to connect with, communicate with, and to support the transition of a new board member onto the board. That can make an enormous difference just in terms of answering basic questions that get asked that maybe aren't so clear in the materials that are handed out, and making the person feel comfortable, to make them feel like a part of the family that is the board of directors. So I've gone through those pretty quickly because I want to get to Cindy and to Pierre. Like I said, some more details will be coming to you tomorrow with the tip sheet. And with that, Cindy, why don't you speak next?